Let's go.
Party rock is in the house tonight. Everybody just have a good time.
Yeah.
And we gon' make you lose your mind. Woo. Everybody just have a good time.
Clap.
Party rock is in the house tonight.
Oh.
Everybody just have a good time.
What I would like to do actually today is to share some of my educational upbringing and schooling experiences in an attempt to highlight some very important principles, which are the need to effectively deal with the pressures around you, the importance of having set goals and a mission in mind, like a vision in mind, and the importance of being resilient and persevering in chasing those goals. I hope I can do that in the 10 to 15 minutes that I have. So to begin with, in terms of my background, I was raised in Auburn, 3 flats away from Auburn McDonald's, so you can imagine how exciting it was for me back then. Back at the time, I was one of 5 kids to parents who had fled war-torn Lebanon in search of a better life for themselves and their families. And schooling was the least of my priorities, at least back then. So from the beginning of primary school to about year 9, school wasn't for me. In fact, I really hated it. I hated being there. I hated my teachers. I hated the whole system of education. It just wasn't for me. School was like a playground. I'd go to school, eat the food that my mum made me. For the Lebanese in the audience, za'atar was my favourite sandwich, and I'm sure many of you still have it these days as a sandwich. So I'd turn up, have my food, hang out with the boys, and learn nothing. It just wasn't for me. I wasn't very interested. I wouldn't pay attention in class. I wouldn't do my homework. I wasn't popular amongst the teachers. I was a bit of a troublesome student, just a little bit, without going into details. And that was it for me, early days. My interests at the time were in the popular things amongst teenagers. As you can imagine what they would be: cars, being muscular and going to the gym, looking big and strong. Self-defense, I did kickboxing for some time. And my mind was so out of whack, so to speak, that I even took an interest in graffiti and even liked the gang culture. It was just pretty cool, During those years, my schooling, my marks were appalling. I was coming last and second last in most of my subjects, and my dad used to joke that I left no one behind me. They were all in front of me. I was coming last. Pretty generous. As for my friends, many of them were worse than me. In years 9 and year 10, I had friends that were smoking cigarettes, doing bad things without going into specifics, and some of them even went out of the way to get a real tattoo. Some of you may be thinking, how the hell did this guy get into uni and become a doctor? He must have had connections or known some boys or something, or known some Habibs to get there, that's the only way you can work. I wish it was that easy. But to tell you something, during those years of being the clown of the class, getting into trouble and the rest of it, I wasn't really comfortable on the inside. I just kept on saying, there has to be more out there. Surely, it can't be so wasteful and so empty. There's surely more out there. And so it wasn't up until year 9 or thereabouts that I discovered the whole world of learning and education and moving forward. And it was all with the help of a man by the name of Jeffrey Lee, an Asian bloke that I worked for in his takeaway shop. I started working for this man in year 6, and you can imagine having an income, feeling even more cool. I've got some sort of independence. Started working for this man, and this Asian was, you can say, a typical Asian. He would ask me to read and to learn and power his knowledge and the rest of it. And I was a typical teenager thinking, what the hell is this Asian telling me? I'm not interested in that. It's not cool. But he persevered. He kept on going. And I worked for him up until year 11. So in year 9, with his perseverance and maybe a bit more maturity on my side and other reasons, the penny dropped. So I became interested all of a sudden. And I wanted to change my career paths altogether and become a doctor. For some people, that was a bit of a joke. And to do that, it was incredibly difficult. You can imagine the kind of obstacles, the kind of pressures, the kind of negative environment, the negative vibes that were around me. I was attending a school, Granville Boys High School, that wasn't the best back then. As Wissam said, it's much, much better these days. I have a lot of respect for it. My younger brother is at the school now. But back then, there were some issues. We didn't have permanent teachers for some subjects, very high turnover. There wasn't that continuity of learning and education and rapport that you develop with the teachers. My friends were a bad influence, as you can imagine, trying to, lead me astray in relative terms back then. My home situation wasn't ideal. There was 6 of us living in 2-bedroom flat. My parents were uneducated, and I don't say this with any shame, but they just couldn't relate to me. They couldn't provide me that, that kind of support. My older brother entered into a trade. My older sister got married at a young age, and the rest of my siblings were younger than me and therefore went over no help. So you can imagine the huge odds, the obstacles, the difficulties around me. But that wasn't going to stop me. So I put it in my heart and I moved forward. I just get filled with emotions every time I think about it. So on this Asian's advice, I took up his advice of reading. So I started reading, and my reading was so poor that every line I would read, I wouldn't understand the word. In every line, there was one word I couldn't understand. Thanks. So how to come around, there was every line, there was a word I couldn't understand. So I had this little book, and I still have it at home. You know those little books that they're about that big and you flip over? So I used to write every word in red and every meaning in black. And it filled up pretty quickly because I didn't just, my words were all new to me. So I kept on going that was with the English. And in a very short time period, my English, my communication skills were significantly improved. I was able to read, write, and speak better. And it was very noticeable. And not only did that help me with English, obviously, but it helped me across all subjects, even mathematics. There were very talented students out there, but when the question is very wordy, they can't understand it. And so that helped me with everything. Apart from the reading, I studied incredibly hard. I was very, very structured with my timetable. And even now, 14 years later, I recall in very great detail the study timetable that I put for myself. It was pretty intense. By definition, I was probably crazy. So I studied incredibly hard, studying every spare minute, using my teachers to the greatest, benefit. And it was only at that point that I really realised how much the teachers really care for me and how much they care for students who show an interest. As a Muslim, I really took up, I'm heavily involved in prayers and asking the God to open my heart and to make things easy for me. And for me, what made it more difficult, I had to literally teach myself my subjects. Just added another obstacle to where I was coming from. But continuing on continued on to about year 10, I came first in 2 subjects. In year 12, by the end of it, I came first in every single subject. Ducks the school, and I scored a HSC mark of 96. And as a lebo to parents who are uneducated, with all due respects, who has no relatives at university, that was pretty big news, And although it was a good mark, it wasn't high enough to get into medicine. But I wasn't going to let that hold me back, I had a goal in my heart, in my mind of, I just really wanted to get there. So the option was to do medical science and apply for graduate entry medicine. And I did that. So I got into medical science. Again, same deal, studying very hard, attending lectures, tutes, engaging. Did very well. I think I came, I was one of the top students, maybe second in the group. And that was amongst students from James Roos, the Kings, the Grammars, and all those high-profile, high-roller schools, And I was out of Granville Boys, Auburn, competing with those guys. So at the end of my degree, I applied for medicine, and I didn't get accepted. And you can imagine, okay, upset, the rest of it. I thought, again, resilience, going for your goal, not giving up, persevering. I thought, okay, I'll do a year of research, And then apply a second time, no big deal. So I did a research project, again, very successful. Just as a side point, I don't mean to brag about anything. I'm just impressing upon you some learning points. It doesn't add anything for me to brag about myself. So did the research project, wrote up my thesis, presented my findings, went to conferences, very successful. Applied the second time, and again, wasn't successful. And you can imagine, in hindsight, I think I became clinically depressed. I was dumbfounded, I was devastated. All the negative words that you can pull out of the thesaurus, it was me. But after a very short time period, my faith in God, brought me back, gave me the strength, applied again. The third attempt was successful. Got into medicine, completed that, graduated as a doctor. I've been working now for 4 years as a medical doctor, and the next step is specialty training. So what this kind of shows you is that you must never, ever allow anyone to tell you what you could or should be doing. Do not give anyone the permission to draw a circle around you and tell you that you're not good enough to step out of it. You must truly believe in yourself, look into your heart, and do what you think is best. I really strongly encourage each and every one of you to sit down alone and ask yourself the question and be honest to yourself. The worst is when you lie to yourself. Be honest to yourself and ask, what is it that I'd really, truly like to be, or in the future, what is it that I'd really want to be? Don't care about what Shaymeh and Mustafa and your parents and teachers say. By all respect, take their opinion, but what is it that you'd really like to do? If you'd really like to enter university and become an architect, an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer, whatever it may be, well then by all means put that into your heart and work towards it. There's no reason that you cannot achieve it. You may invent reasons. You may think, okay, you may look at your parents, your siblings, your previous academic records, your schooling, whatever it is, but all those reasons are really crap, to put it simply, because I can speak from experience. My parents are uneducated people, as I alluded to earlier. They never, ever checked my report cards. They never went to parent-teacher interviews. They never encouraged me to study. My school at the time wasn't the best of schools, with all due respects. I had to literally teach myself some of the subjects, literally. My friends were a bad influence. They tried to drag me down, but when my goals was really, truly in my heart and I really had something in, a vision, I could not care less. Everything else was by the ways, just by the sides. And it got to the point where if they really tried to take me away from my studies, and became obvious to them as well, I'll tell them to get stuffed, but in very colourful Arabic language, And, that's how it was. And I'm very thankful to God for me to have taken this path, because some of the friends that I went to school with who continued on with their own, pathways, ended up as uneducated and, in jobs that they really hate. Some of them actually became very bad people, and bad enough to be, in jail or behind bars, maybe for the rest of their lives, as an extreme example. And I can tell you that they did not see that coming as teenagers, because something as so big as, requiring jail terms all begins by doing something so small and so stupid as, hanging out at bus stops and train stations. It really does. That's where it begins. I've had friends that come to me and say, bro, I wish I did what you did back then, studying, not caring about anyone, and moving forward. And it's never, ever, ever too late. You just must realize that. And once you realize that, you run away with it. And I can tell you that being part of this place, Alpha Omega, this is not a plug for Alpha Omega, I'm really, this is my opportunity to give something back wholeheartedly and generally. Being part of this place does wonders for your development that you may not necessarily appreciate or see at this present time. You have an absolute powerhouse that is genuinely interested, that is investing huge amounts of resources on every single level, not only to get you a good HSC result, which is your most immediate concerns, but the powerhouse is really interested beyond that. It's interested in raising leaders of the future. Not necessarily doctors. We don't need all doctors. We don't need all engineers. But it's really invested in, they're really working on raising, proper leaders. Principles like individuality, self-discipline, independence, that's something that you'll take with you for the rest of your lives. I'm told that you guys have no uniform. Is that correct? Correct?
For the afternoon school, yeah.
For those, yeah. So I'm referring, yeah. So there's no uniform, and just specifically with that example, no uniform and no bells, that's not chaos, that's not lack of planning. This is teaching you self-discipline and, independence. Speaking from experience as an ex-Alpha Omega student, I met Alpha Omega and Tariq in year 12, so I was very, very late in my studies. It was like 7 months out of the HSC. And so I had done most of the work back then, but even then, when I met Tariq, I didn't think much of him back then. Even now I don't think much of him. No, just kidding. So the Alpha Omega, I was able to help boost my studies through the direct tuition and the resources. But I can tell you that my relationship with Alpha Omega and Tariq transcends far, far beyond the HSC experience. Even 14 years later, I still come back as a student, seeking help and support. And they've literally helped me in every single level without having to go into personal details. I literally mean that every single level, I've been able to turn to Alpha Omega for help and support, and they've offered it very, very happily and promptly. So what I'm trying to say is that you must realize when you're part of this organization, not only are you getting the relative short-term benefits of the HSC, but you're entering into a lifelong support network, which is unmatched by anywhere else. I think my time is coming up. I really hope that what I and Jason have shared with you turns out to be of some benefit, and that you really go home and just reflect amongst yourselves, by yourself, about what we're saying. We really mean it. Do not be afraid to dream. Do not allow self-doubt to enter your heart and take the better of you. Dream and follow those dreams, and persevere and fight off those pressures. Against all odds, I've just given you a really snap. I can go into a lot of detail. Against all odds and obstacles, and was able to rise up from being at the very bottom of the class to being at the very top of the class, to entering undergraduate medical science, topping that, entering medicine, working as a doctor, working on my road to become a specialist. And I'm honestly no special. I honestly do not think I'm talented or anything special. I'm a hard worker, yes, very hard worker. But if I can do it, I have absolutely no doubt, no reason in my mind why you cannot do the exact same, if not better. Thank you.
We just wanna see you shake that.